Hi, I'm Brother Barry Walls, pastor at Salem Baptist Church, and I'm here asking you, what are you listening to? Right now there are a lot of voices shouting to be heard. All of them are competing for our attention, from all walks of life, from the secular to the sacred. The question for most of us as Christians is, how can we hear God's voice in all of this cacophony of sound? We come to the story of Elijah today, here in 1 Kings chapter 19. And Elijah here had ran away from Queen Jezebel because she had promised to take his life. She said, I will kill you within the matter of just a day. And so Elijah runs away. Actually, he goes 180 miles away. And we pick up the story here in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, beginning with verse 9. And he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with a sword. And I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a still small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle, and went out and stood in the entering in of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him, and said, What doest thou here, Elijah? When we look at the story of Elijah, what we see is a man who is under tremendous stress. Here is a man who has endured some 3.5 years of drought. A man who was fed by the ravens. A man who in chapter 18 had a showdown there on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And after that, he outran Ahab's chariot. And then he also walked 180 miles because Jezebel was out to kill him. There are a lot of folks all over the world today who are under an amazing amount of stress. And some are wondering simply, how am I going to make it? How am I going to be able to keep the lights on? How am I going to be able to provide for my family? Life was hard before. We were just barely making it. But now, what in the world are we going to do? And so I encourage everyone, the church calls out, Christians call out, to listen to that still small voice. Seek it out. Because just as God speaks to Elijah, God also speaks to us as well. God challenges us. God gives us guidance and encouragement in that still small voice. God speaks not in dramatic fashion as most of us would think. Sometimes he does, like in the burning bush when he calls Moses. Sometimes thunder and lightning, as the children of Israel heard. But for the most part, that's not the way it is. Although Elijah was looking for that, as he saw the wind and blow and the earthquake and the fire and all those things. He was looking for something really dramatic. Really dramatic. And all of us, for the most part, sometimes are looking for that. We're wanting God to do just some great, mind-blowing, all-inspiring something to say, yes, Lord, yes, we know that's you. But for the most part, that isn't how God operates. If we examine these words that describe the voice, the first word is still. That word means quiet. It means calm. It means silence. Stillness. And as I was looking at the definition of this, the idea or the image that came to my mind was that of going out at night, late at night after the snow had fallen on the ground. There's such a stillness and a quietness there. One might even use the word tranquility. There's nothing, there's just that blanket of snow insulating all sound, that stillness. And then there is the word small. And this word made me scratch my head a little bit as I looked at it, because the word means crushed. And I thought, what does that mean here as we look at this? But what it is the idea of compact. Compact, if you take something and you compact it down. And it is a very little thing. A very little thing. And so we put those words together. The idea of quiet and calm and a very little thing. And out of this comes this voice. And the word voice here means to call aloud. It's a sound or proclamation. But the difference is here it's God's voice calling, isn't it? It's God's voice calling. There is something about it that is so different from everything else. So different. Even though there's a stillness and a smallness to it. It sounds out so different from what the world is shouting out. Through this, God was teaching Elijah that he doesn't always work in dramatic big events, like the contest at Mount Carmel. But he works by the means of a still, small voice. God works in ministries that are neither big nor loud. And so those are the things that we look at. The other thing that we need to think about when we think about that still small voice is sometimes it's hard to hear that voice. Sometimes it's hard to hear that voice. As I've already said, there is so much competition from the world shouting at us, telling us all these things that we need to do or we need to buy, that we should be wanting. And then the other thing, though, is that our expectations are different than reality. That's where Elijah found himself, and as I said, a lot of other people have too. God doesn't work the way that we think that he should. God wasn't in the wind. God wasn't in the earthquake or the great fire. And so we just don't know what to listen for. We don't know what to listen for. I'm reminded of a wonderful story from 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 3. Samuel here is a young boy, maybe a young man. And he is living there and ministering before the Lord where the ark is. And he is working with Eli, who is the priest. And so we're told this story. It says, it came to pass at that time when Eli laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim. He could not see. And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. And he ran to Eli, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not. Lie down again. And he went and laid down. And the Lord called yet again Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am I, for thou didst call me. And he said, I called not, my son. Lie down again. Verse 7 is an important verse. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant hearest. See, Eli, the priest, we're told he was getting a little long in years there, but he remembered. The light went off, and he remembered how God speaks. And Eli told Samuel, Samuel, go back. open yourself up, and here's how to respond when God calls. Here's how to respond. Eli, remember that, how God called. And so Samuel was unaware of it. Samuel, the Bible tells us there, he didn't know how God calls. He didn't know the revelation of God. But because he had opened himself up, the Lord began to speak and to tell him awesome and wonderful things. Elijah recognizes the still small voice as the nearness of God. He recognizes that. And not only does he recognize it because of the nearness of God, Elijah is compelled to cover his face. It isn't just because the wind might still be stirring and there's dust out there, but it is because it is a sign of reverence unto God. The third thing I want to share with you with this idea of the still small voice is that God is always near. He's always near. The Lord doesn't rebuke Elijah for a lapse of faith. He doesn't rebuke Elijah for believing and fearing Jezebel more than trusting God. He doesn't even rebuke Elijah for leaving his post of duty. What an awesome time this would have been as the people cried out there on Mount Carmel. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. These people wanted to reestablish a relationship with the Lord. What a wonderful time that would have been. It could have been a time of great spiritual transformation in the nation of Israel, as it were. Who knows what would have happened? But God doesn't even say, you know what, you shouldn't have left. Instead, 2 times He says, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? That's all He says. He doesn't rebuke him for saying, you know what, Elijah, you should have been back in Israel. You were needed. Instead, God responds with a ministering angel. Before Elijah got to the cave, he wound up at a place there was a juniper tree, and he lay down and went to sleep. He woke up and found an angel there. God responded with a ministering angel, and we're told that there was fresh baked bread right there. We're told there was water there. And not only that, he was allowed the blessing of a restful sleep. And this occurred 2 times right here, so that Elijah was sustained to the point where he could journey about 40 days into this cave. God is always near. Think about Elijah falling asleep there with the angel watching him. And I'm reminded of Psalms chapter 4, verse 8. I will lay me down in peace and sleep, for the Lord only maketh me to dwell in safety. Elijah was not forsaken, for God was with him. Matthew chapter 14 is a great and wonderful story. It's the story of Jesus walking on the water. The disciples had went out on the ship. They're headed to the other side. It's dark, and they're out there on the Sea of Galilee, and it's tossed, and the wind is up, and there's waves coming over the boat, and they're really scared. The 4th watch of the night, that last watch of the night, it's really dark. And Jesus, they see him out there walking on the sea, except they don't really know it's Jesus. They're scared. They're scared. They were troubled, and they said it's a spirit or a phantom, and they cried out with fear. And in verse 27, in chapter 14 of Matthew's Gospel, through all of the noise of the storm, that still small voice calls out and says these words, be of good cheer, it is I. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. There it is. Christ calling out to them. Be of good cheer. Don't be afraid. It's me. Why? Because God is always near. What a wonderful word of encouragement. That encouragement, by the way, also extends to the support of other believers, And God shares with Elijah, you know what, Elijah, you think you're the only person that's following me. You think that you're the only person who worships me and has not bent your knee to Baal. But you're wrong. In verse 18, God tells Elijah, you know what? There are 7,000 other people here in this nation who believe and who are just as faithful as you are. Those who have not worshiped Baal. So that's a word of encouragement as well. But then also God gives guidance. God gives guidance. And we find that in the verses 15 through 17 in the story of Elijah. The Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah shalt thou anoint to be a prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass, him that escapes the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. So there it is right there. God gives guidance to Elijah. And not only that, a lot of the commentaries say this is a new commission for Elijah. This is a turning point in his life, and this is something new, because one of the other things that God is doing is God is raising up Elisha to take the place of Elijah as well. And so that's what's going on there. God gives guidance. Why? Because he's near. He's near. And God does the same for us as well in that still small voice. So the last thing is, what do we do after we hear that voice? Do we tell others? Do we keep it to ourselves? What do we do? We should do the same thing that Elijah does. And so he departed thence. There it is right there. He leaves the cave. He responds to God's voice. He departed. He obeyed God and followed the guidance of the Lord. He did that. This time that we're in, this present situation that we're in, I encourage you to listen, to seek out the voice of God. And not only to seek it out, but to hear what he is saying and then to respond to it. And I promise you that you will be blessed. Let's go, Lord, in prayer. Father God, as we come before you this day, I pray for all those who are listening, and I pray for all those in our country and those around the world as well. Father, I pray that we would all have a desire to seek your voice. I pray, Father, that you would bring comfort to those who are hurting and those who are mourning because of loss of loved ones in this time. Father, I pray that you would bring comfort and ease the fears of those who are so scared. Bring a stillness and a calmness to their life. And Father, I pray that you would encourage all those who have lost the will to go forward, where good things are still waiting for them. Father, bless all those who are here in this country. Bless all those around the world today as they seek your face and try to make understanding of it. Lord, be with all